There's a song called False God, which I think is about oral sex. And then there's a song called Woulda, Coulda, Shoulda. And now there's a song, Guilty as Sin, which is a masturbation song. And all of them they're pretty sexually explicit and they have a bunch of religious imagery. And I think it's just such an interesting connection that she draws. And one thing people would say is like, oh, it's like she's like making an analogy between like religion and being in love, right? But I also think it's kind of a commentary on like what is so compelling about religion. Like it goes the other direction as well, which is that I think there's something about Christian imagery or Catholic imagery that it has to be like a little bit gross and like subversive in order to like get a hook on people. Like there has to be like a little bit of like an edge within like religious experience in the same way.
Like Lil Nas X twerking on the devil.
Yeah.
Dr. Jessica Flanigan, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, of course. So right before we started recording, you had mentioned that you recently started writing an essay or a series of essays on Taylor Swift. And I think this could be an interesting jumping off point because my first entrance to your work was the debate you participated in on the billionaire status of Taylor Swift, which we'll get into. But first, I want to know what sparked this series of essays for Taylor Swift. What was sort of your entrance into that?
Well, I have two friends who both teach classes at their schools, BYU and UAB, on Taylor Swift. They're both teaching philosophy classes about Taylor Swift. And I teach applied ethics classes here. But we were talking about how, you know how like when you're in philosophy classes and you read like the history of political thought, like Hobbes or Rousseau or, you know, Plato or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you'll read like Shakespeare or the Bible or like great works of literature. And there's all of this philosophical content in these very literary texts. And you're like, you know what? Lyrics have that too for some lyricists. And one of the lyricists that we love that has that kind of philosophical content is Taylor Swift. And I think there's something so methodologically interesting about being able to find philosophical content from lyrics, because often the way that we do philosophy, it's very much like thought experiment, like the trolley problem or whatever. And that's kind of artificial to the human experience. But if you have somebody that like puts a lot of what you call like phenomenology, like what is it like to be a human, into their arguments, I think that gives you just like such like a rich philosophical source of intuitions. Like there's so much to work with. And so we were like, we should just do a philosophy volume that has a philosophical approach to Taylor Swift lyrics, where we treat that as like a primary philosophical text and like figure out the interesting new ideas that we can get out of these lyrics. And so I think that's like the kind of the motivation for it. So that's what I'm writing about with Taylor.
As you're speaking, I'm realizing how much I shouldn't have majored in accounting. There are a bunch of reasons for it, but I went to University of Richmond. You teach at University of Richmond. I came into college wanting to be a professional baseball player, and I saw the business school as this backup plan that is still a great degree, but it wasn't something that I put a lot of deep thought into because I was always on I'm going to get drafted, I'm going to go play pro baseball, wear that into the ground. Got a couple surgeries my senior year, went to absolute shit as a baseball player. And then you're talking about the philosophy of Taylor Swift in class, which whether or not you like Taylor Swift, I would take that class. That's a super interesting thing to think about, is how Taylor Swift is engaging with certain ideas philosophically and what that means with her lyrics, with her songwriting. So yeah, I also agree that would be a really cool angle for essays to get into the deeper sort of philosophical implications of what her lyrics mean and what her music means.
I love you're saying that, because another thing I love about it is I just think that it's so good for anybody, whatever you're teaching, to be able to just meet students where they are. And like a cool thing about being able to do philosophy of Taylor Swift is maybe people don't have a lot of intrinsic motivation to learn about the philosophical concepts of supererogation or weakness of will or whatever. But then if you're like, listen to this song about the human experience, and then it's like you can kind of like pull people in and then show them like why the tools of philosophy can actually like help them understand the world a little bit better. And so that's kind of how I see it. And so I'm excited about the volume.
Yeah, I'm realizing that more and more as I get older is how important that hook into pop culture can be for drawing people into
Yeah.
the deeper learning of all the layers and textures that are underneath it. I'm a huge fan of stand-up comedy. If you name a stand-up comedy podcast, I've probably listened to 3 or 4 episodes of it. And I've started reading a lot of the stand-up biographies. And I have a list of dozens of sources that I've gotten just from jokes that comics will make, or a comic will make an offhanded comment in their biography of like, oh, I was reading this book, or going into this sort of philosophical line of thinking, or this person's my favorite
Yeah.
philosopher, and then I'm like, okay, I gotta check that person out because it led to one of my favorite jokes of all time. And of course, that's different for every single person, what that hook is. But as you're speaking, I'm just realizing, like I think that's also one of the marks of a great teacher, is someone that is tapped into the pop culture and sort of like uses that to reel people in and be like, hey, if you're interested in this, you're probably also going to be interested in this.
Yeah. Stand-up is such good philosophy in it. And like, I'll even, like, I use a clip from one of Dave Chappelle's stand-up specials in my medical ethics class, because it's just like a perfectly like deductively valid set of arguments about the ethics of abortion that like poses this like really nice, clean argument. It's like perfectly mappable. And the way that he delivers it, it's just in a philosophically valid format where it's like so helpful to get on the table for students. And the argument is like, if you believe that women have bodily rights that give them a right to have an abortion, which is the paper that we're reading, Judy Thompson's paper on abortion for that day. Great. Like, he's like, I accept all of that. But I will say that if you believe that, the man should not have to pay child support. Because if women have bodily rights that entitle them to decide not to become parents, men should also be entitled to decide not to become parents. And it's like, the way that he frames it with like kind of getting everybody on board with him about reproductive choice and then like flipping it to this revisionary conclusion, it's like, that's exactly what philosophy should be doing. It should be showing you that like everything that you thought already entails a bunch of weird stuff that you don't believe in necessarily. And then it's like surprising and new what you can find in your own beliefs. And he draws it out in like 3 minutes. It's like very well done philosophically.
Yeah. That's Sticks and Stones, right? I think from
I don't remember which one it is.
Sticks and Stones special.
Yeah, it's one of the Netflix specials.
Yeah, it was. I remember that moment when I heard the joke for the first time, and if I'm remembering correctly, he gives the abortion argument first, and why abortion should be a valid healthcare option. We should have open, free, legal abortion. And then all the women in the crowd start cheering. But because I know Dave Chappelle so well, I'm like, this can't. Like, he wouldn't say a joke for a cheer. And then he does that thing where he'll just like, I think in that special, he was using a Juul. Like, he's gone back and forth between cigarettes and Juul. So he just takes like a massive rip of the Juul. And he's just like, but, and then he goes in. He's so good at holding that silence. And then he just flips the entire argument on its head. Not flip it on its head. That's the wrong way. But like, he goes into an angle that is sort of an antidote to the applause, where he's like, oh yeah, that's where he was going with the laugh, and both sides of the joke are valid.
Yeah, and like Bertrand Russell is this like old, like 100 years ago philosopher, and he was like, the point of philosophy is to take something that everyone thought was obvious and to show that entails something that nobody thinks could be true. And it's like, that's just such a good example of it, where it's like all of the premises that you have, if you took them really seriously, would have really surprising conclusions. So you have to like think a little bit more about what your own beliefs are. And I just think that's like kind of the genius of a lot of stand-up comedy, is that they can do that.
Yeah. If obviously you'd be interested more deeply in the philosophy of stand-up comedy. And one of the sources that I've come across recently is, I think it was Jimmy Carr. It was definitely Jimmy Carr, but I could send you the podcast. I forget which podcast it's on, but he talks about how at this point in his career, Jimmy Carr is more, he's obviously still obsessed with the funny, but he's also becoming obsessed with the philosophy behind comedy and giving people comedy as a language, because stand-up is one of those things where there's not really a universal tool to teach people, you know, how to speak French, like babble, like how to tell a joke, like what's the
Yeah.
language behind all this sort of different misdirections and you know, emphasizing certain things and uh just like all the different things that go into crafting a joke. And Jimmy Carr seems very in tune with the philosophy behind comedy and comedy as a language itself, which I like because he's made me start to think, you know, when I see a news story or when I, you know, see something that people are having that initial gut reaction, comedy challenges
Yeah.
you to go deeper and be like, okay, that's like the gut reaction is never going to be the funniest because everyone's already thinking that. What's like the next
Right.
layer of, oh, if you say this, like this is gonna, you know, hit emotionally.
A while ago, I read this like kind of Evo psyche book that Robin Hanson wrote called The Elephant in the Brain. And he has this thing of like, why do people laugh? Like what's the evolutionary explanation for laughter? Like, why do people love laughing so much? And his thought is that like the whole book is like so much of everything is like signaling and like in-group solidarity and stuff. But when people are laughing, it's because it's a way of signaling that they sense danger, but they're actually safe. And so it makes sense of a lot of laughing. Like if something tickles, it's like a part of you that it would be dangerous, but like you're like signaling that it's like okay. And then if you see someone else fall down unexpectedly, but you're safe, like you laugh, or people laughing at funerals, like you have like danger in your mind, but then like you're signaling to your group that you're actually safe and that they don't need to like worry for you.
Yeah.
And like I think that's kind of how comedy works too, that it's like a kind of safe way of experiencing dangerous ideas, and hopefully philosophy is that too. But
Yeah.
I think that's interesting to think of like what is it that we enjoy about laughing in that way.
No, that makes sense because I'm thinking back to just like the early days of talking shit with your friends when you're in
Right.
elementary school, middle school, and you're figuring out what boundaries are. And that, you know, if some kid makes a joke about your shirt, you don't go right to his dead mom. You're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
that was a little like it didn't match the energy. And then,
Right.
but if you had said something else or you go back at his shirt or some other article of clothing, he or she may laugh at that. So it's kind of like
Right.
learning, and it is, yeah, it is like a signal of, okay, I'm good with that. Yeah, there may be some pain involved there, but also the balance of how it was delivered made me laugh. So
Yeah. Now I have a
yeah.
son in middle school right now, and a lot of his humor seems to just be like making fun of athletes that his friends like. And so it's just
Mm,
kind of like, but it's like sort of this thing of like, oh, like how harsh could we be while still being funny or whatever. And it's just kind of like I don't really get it, but it is sort of the same thing of like how can you balance like aggression with like solidarity and safety like at the same time, and it's like that
yeah.
kind of weird balance.
Yeah, I love that.
Um,
Everyone's obsessed with Patrick Mahomes, and he's just like, "Fuck Patrick Mahomes, that piece of shit." I'll tell you.
well, he is so we're such Ravens fans, and so yeah, like
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, no, that's like that,
after those playoffs.
I mean that's a very hard hitting style of comedy for sure. It's just going after beloved figures, as you know, with Taylor Swift, which would be
Yeah,
a good transition. There's no shortage of videos or commentary making fun of the Taylor Swift or the Swiftie fandom, music, whatever it is. And
yeah,
I mentioned earlier that I listened to the debate you participated in on Open to Debate, and
yeah,
the title of that episode, uh, which people should definitely go give a listen, is "Does Taylor Swift deserve her $1 billion fortune?" And I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on Taylor Swift's latest album before we get into the debate itself. So, Tortured Poets Department, what are your favorite moments, surprises, things you didn't care for, things you loved? Like, what was your sort of initial reaction to it?
I love it. I mean, my top before this album was like Reputation, Midnight's Folklore, and so this was sort of like well aligned for my own like things that I love about Taylor. I love how brave it was. I mean, people were like, "Oh, like she's not innovating," and I think it was like really innovative and very brave that she was really a lot more kind of risk taking in the lyrics than she had been on Midnight's, and so I appreciated that. And I love But Daddy, I Love Him. I think that that's like such an interesting thing that she was like calling out the Swifties and the fan base in that way for the Matty
Yeah.
Healy hate, I guess. And
do you mind going into that a little bit? Because
yeah.
I know the Matt Healy versus Taylor Swift feud on a surface level, but I don't know sort of like all the levels that the song goes into.
The song, it's sort of about like everybody who's like in the Swiftie fandom when she was spending a lot of time with Matty Healy. They were really critical of her because they didn't like his politics. And he did this interview with the New Yorker with Gia Tolentino, where he was basically saying, all of these people think that they have a problem with me or my politics or my, going on this podcast where people made fun of Ice Space. But really what they want is to just signal that they're one of the good ones and I'm one of the bad ones. They don't actually care about what I said or what I believe or anything like that. It's just a sort of kind of group identity type situation.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, and like, I don't need to like cater to those people. Like, and I don't need to like let myself be, dragged down by people who are just wanting to like stand next to each other, pointing at the bad one so that they can look like the good one. That was like something like his quote. And during that time, like Taylor Swift said nothing. But then they aren't together. And like a lot of the album's just like about the breakup. But the song But Daddy, I Love Him, which is like almost 6 minutes. It's a really long song. It really is about people in like her, like the Swiftie fan base who were really critical of her, thinking that they had this kind of outsized entitlement to like tell her how she should be living her life. And she really just calls it out. And she's like, yeah, I'm not like, you don't own me and I'm not accountable to you. And like, do not think that you can kind of manipulate my actual personal life just because you have an objection to someone that she's dating. Like that. And I thought that was like really brave because like everybody is like so afraid of the Swiftie fandom coming after them online.
Yeah.
And she sort of was like, yeah, like if you don't like it, you don't have to be here. Like, it's like, and that was such a good move. And you can imagine being like the most famous person in the world having this really conservative impulse to want to preserve it. But she was just like not taking it.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that for her.
I mean, that's also a big ethos that runs through stand-up as well, is being willing to piss off your audience and being willing to divide your audience for the sake of a piece of art, for the sake of like the best version of something you think you could present. So,
and there is this tension with Taylor Swift that she is so popular that one problem in pop music that makes pop music like I think maybe a little bit less interesting lyrically than like hip hop or country is that it has this sort of universalism and like a lack of specificity that sort of like takes some of the humanity out of it because it's trying to have such broad appeal. And you could totally see that she was in danger maybe of like going into that route where it just became like so broad appeal, like not wanting to piss off anybody, just like the median voter musical experience. And the fact that she really like leaned against that first with Folklore and then with this album, that took a lot of courage. Like, there's so much at stake. And
I also can't imagine what that phenomenon is like to be a person like Taylor Swift, where hundreds of thousands, even millions of strangers think that they might have some sort of ownership over something as personal as a romantic relationship. Like that is insane to feel that weight of someone or like a force of, and maybe not all the Swifties, but a percentage of Swifties that are like, you need to, we're keeping this person away from you for your protection. Like we're somehow protecting the god of Swiftiedom, and we're making this decision for you. And she's a person, that has her own romantic interests, and you can do whatever you want, for your own personal life, obviously, but that pressure, I can't imagine what that pressure is like to have applied to not just your music career, but also your personal life. That's crazy.
Yeah. And she's lived with this her whole life. And any ordinary person, like, can you imagine if like both your bosses and your employees and everybody in your neighborhood all had an opinion over like the choices you made in your personal life and felt the
Yeah.
need to just like weigh in?
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Like, can you imagine living like that?
Yeah.
I'd just be like,
it's like in my next Zoom meeting, my boss just brings up all my Hinge matches from that week.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I really like Sarah. Chelsea's kind of struggling a little bit. She seems like a little bit of a bitch. You know, why don't you date Sarah instead? I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, how is this real life?
When my own mother, who loves me, has any opinion on any of my choices, I'm like, what is this? Like, it's my life. You know?
Yeah.
And so like the fact that like a billion people in the world are like retweeting and reading about her own personal life. Can you even imagine? Yeah. And that song is good and it's really funny. And it has like kind of the same thing with like the stand-up thing, because it's like, I'm having his baby and then there's like a beat and then she's like, no, I'm not. But it's like, she has a sense of humor. And I think she's kind of come into her own as having a sense of humor as she's gotten more confidence too. It's good.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of her for the album.
Yeah.
And it has yet another Catholic sex song, which is like a genre that only Taylor Swift does, which I think is, I might write about the Catholic sex songs for the edited volume, because it's like a very interesting theory of religion. And
yeah.
Also she keeps on writing these.
Yeah. What are your
interesting.
What are your thoughts on that song in particular? And which song is that again?
Guilty as Sin.
Guilty as Sin.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now there's like a trinity of like Christian themed sexually explicit songs in the Taylor Swift.
Did she grow up Catholic?
I think she might have gone to a Catholic school.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there's a song called False God, which I think is about oral sex. And then there's a song called Woulda, Coulda, Shoulda. And now there's a song Guilty as Sin, which is a masturbation song. And all of them have like, they're pretty sexually explicit and they have a bunch of religious imagery. And I think it's just such an interesting connection that she draws. And one thing people would say is like, oh, it's like she's like making an analogy between like religion and being in love, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it's kind of a commentary on like what is so compelling about religion. Like it goes the other direction as well, which is that I think there's something about like Christian imagery or Catholic imagery that it has to be like a little bit like gross and like subversive in order to like get a hook on people. Like there has to be like a little bit of like an edge within like religious experience in the same way.
Like Lil Nas X twerking on the devil or something like that. Yeah.
Or like back in the 80s, Madonna was like, she said crucifixes are sexy because there's a naked man on them.
Yeah.
And I was like, facts, Madonna. Like she gets it. It's like,
I mean, especially when Jesus has an 8-pack, and not just from being scared. When you look at some Jesuses and you're like, did this dude have a fucking Bowflex in the year 30 AD? Like, what has happened? But yeah, no.
But there's something about that makes it like so compelling. Like the aesthetics of religion have a little bit of like subversion, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think it's like so interesting that she keeps on picking up on that in those songs.
Yeah, I went to Catholic high school, and I just on a personal level, there are things, whether it has to do with sex or morals that come from the Catholic religion, that come from the Bible, where I haven't looked at it in over 10 years. I go to church once, maybe every few years if I'm with a family member who goes to church on Easter or something.
Yeah.
But I have these things, no pun intended, but nailed into my brain where it's like, oh, I have some sort of blockage to masturbation or some sort of blockage to seeing certain things happen in the world or doing certain things myself, where there's no other reason that I would feel that blockage other than the Catholic religion. I can't think of anything else that would have sort of planted that moral seed there that says, you can't, you can have sex in this way, but you can't have sex this way. And it's like, why, if it's all sex, why does it matter? Like, why, it's interesting the imprint that religion can leave on you. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the constant visuals and aesthetics that you're surrounded by in church and Catholic school as well.
Yeah, I think that the aesthetics are like what she's picking up on is that there's like something like really compelling about religious aesthetics when we think about like purity and profanity, and that she's like bringing that into the like romantic song lyrics. And yeah, I just think that's like such an interesting move that she does that. And like, and so that's another song. I love Guilty as Sin. Another song I really, yeah, I mean, I just think that the whole album is like so interesting. Like it's such a good text. But um, the way that she just writes about a thing that, so if I don't write that essay, I'd write one about this idea of like the curse is the gift, where
Mm,
like sometimes like the thing that's like great about a way of being is also the thing that's horrible about it. And so like one theme would be like mental freedom, like being able to think like the wild west of the mind, like being able to think anything. And like that's like having a space for mental freedom in your life is like incredible and liberating, but then it's also like kind of terrifying. And like I think that's like an interesting
yeah.
theme.
Yeah, that
But
it I think that's also part of the appeal for religion, especially Catholicism, when you get 10 commandments and you get imprinted with a way of thinking, it alleviates the stress of being able to choose anything or being able to
mm,
think any which way direction. It's this is the right way, this is the wrong way. So that does whether those choices are correct or not, just having your choices limited does take away some of the stress of being overwhelmed with all the directions you could possibly go.
I can see that. Yeah, it's kind of another like curse is the gift situation where it's like once you have some constraints, there's like freedom in the constraints as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So the $1 billion fortune argument,
Yeah.
I found this whole episode fascinating, and you argued for the side that yes, Taylor Swift does deserve her $1 billion fortune. Can you get into the spirit of that argument and why Taylor Swift deserves her billions?
Well, part of it is I think that it's a really big mistake for people to focus on wealth inequality instead of focusing on poverty simpliciter. And the same kinds of global institutions that are the best for people who are genuinely living in poverty, like the very worst off, those institutions are the ones that produce wealth inequality and billionaires like Taylor Swift. And the billionaire class, especially, comes from industries that are especially good in egalitarian terms in a way, because a lot of times it's industries where the marginal cost of additional production is extremely low, but the
Mm,
gains to innovation are super high. And so if you look at like billionaires in like entertainment or tech, where it's like a lot of like innovation, IP type stuff. I mean, IP is like not like a free market per se because it's a state backed monopoly,
yeah.
but it's a market intervention that's supposed to induce innovation. And like those market interventions that are supposed to induce innovation, we want innovation to be really accessible at a low cost to as many people as possible. So like the internet, Spotify. But when you have that and everybody around the world can listen to Jay-Z or watch LeBron James or choose Taylor Swift at the same price as their less preferred option, when you see someone get like a ton of wealth out of that kind of industry, it's because that was everybody's first choice. And their
Hmm.
second choice couldn't compete against the first choice on price.
Yeah.
So that's like good for people who don't have a lot of resources, that those industries are structured in that way. And then people see billionaires and they're like, oh, we hate that, as if they think that like redistributing and discouraging people from being billionaires would be good for the worst off. Like, no, like the billionaires are an artifact of an economic system that's better for the worst off.
Yeah. Because one of the things that popped up into my head while I was listening to the debate is, okay, if you taxed Taylor Swift out of her billionaire status or you limited her in some way, maybe like would that have an effect on other artists having a bigger voice? Would
Mm,
putting limits on Taylor Swift, limits on Taylor Swift's wealth, would that open up space in the music market, which I imagine is why a lot of people would argue for something like that, not just for the wealth side of it, but the creative aspect of it. I
yeah.
don't think that it really would. I don't think if you limited Taylor Swift's wealth that people would all of a sudden decide to listen to someone else, or it would really have any sort of marginal effect on an artist who was never gonna pop, making them pop to the level of Taylor Swift. Maybe they might have to wait a little bit longer, if that even is the case, but I don't really see limiting the wealth of Taylor Swift shifting the spacing of which artists pop and which artists don't.
Yeah, and I think that's a very like zero sum mindset of thinking like, oh, we only have so much time that we're going to devote on the radio or like to listening for, to music. But it could be positive sum. It could be that people who weren't that interested in listening to music in general get really into Taylor Swift, and then they start exploring all of the other artists. So like my kids, some of them really, like my third kid, she loves Taylor. And then she got really into Lana and Olivia Rodrigo, and she wouldn't have been into any of that stuff if she didn't start by listening to Taylor Swift. And so it's positive externalities for other artists.
I'm curious, is there a philosophical or an ethical argument for or against algorithms? Like something like the Spotify algorithm that will show you more of what you like, and it's trying to latch on to your creative spine and sort of juice that for all it's worth. Like, is there a philosophical argument for or against that? Why it could be a good or bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, philosophers they've written a lot about the AI stuff. And one question is, how paternalistic should these algorithms be? So should they just be like giving you what you want, or should they try to like steer you in a morally better direction or steer you towards stuff that's like a little outside your comfort zone aesthetically? And so, you'll see Spotify will sometimes like push stuff that like I've never heard before. And sometimes I'm like, I hate this. Like I just like, but I mean,
but it also helps you figure out what you hate. I think that's important too, to be like, I hate this. I don't want to listen to this. And that can open up something else where like, oh, I never would have found this if I didn't hate this.
Yeah, that's true. And like, I also think like if Spotify has an interest in doing that because they think that they could like expand their market, like that's okay. I think part of what people worry about with it is that like the algorithm will just be like feeding everybody stuff that they already like. It'll be like overly affirming, and it'll lead to like polarization or echo chambers or something like that. But I think that the problem's not the algorithm. The problem's the people. That is what people want. Like it's the consumer.
So you think the algorithm is showing more? Do you think the algorithm is showing people more of what they want, and that innate desire to be in an echo chamber would exist with or without the algorithm? The algorithm might be enhancing that or accelerating that, but these echo chambers would exist regardless.
Yeah, it's meeting a need for people. Like it's scratching some kind of an itch, and like maybe that's not good for them, but the problem's the consumer, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like algorithmic porn in a way, where you're sort of like edging yourself with news stories or different preferences at times.
Or it's like when people are like, why is my timeline full of all of this like disgusting, horrible content? And I was like, I don't know. What are you clicking on? Like,
yeah, you do. I've noticed that. I'll run self-experiments where I will not click on certain things, or I'll click on frogs or puppies or whatever. And I'll see my Instagram homepage just changes instantly because they're like, oh, he clicked on a frog video. Let's show him 13 more.
Frogs.
Exactly. Dude loves frogs. Clicked on a baseball highlight. Let's show him, 14 more baseball. So it changes pretty dramatically and pretty quickly. And I have seen, I think it was YouTube who recently sent out a survey. I don't know if it was a beta thing or it went out to all users, but it asks you, do you want to see more things that don't necessarily align with your preferences? Something along those lines. And they would show you that 20% of the time or 40% of the time, whatever they picked. And maybe you could scale that personally in the future. I want my feed to be 50-50, or I want my feed to be 70-30 of what I agree with, what I don't. So I think that's also pretty cool.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people are not going to seek it out because they don't want it. They don't like it.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear people that disagree with them or think that they're wrong.
Yeah. But it also is fun to hate watch, though. Like, even if you aren't doing it out of the desire to learn more, if you listen or watch something that you don't like, and I don't know exactly what's going on in my brain, but there's part of it that keeps me watching, even though I may not agree with anything, or maybe I think it's so bad. Like part of my brain's like, no, you need to hate this. Like you like hate watch it, finish this 6-minute video, and then you're gonna fucking like talk about how much you hate it to someone else, and then like you're gonna, and maybe through that hate you'll learn something or you'll discover something new about yourself.
What
But
are you
there,
hate watching?
there's what do I hate watch? I mean, there will be there's kind of like an underworld that started of people hating on certain comedians. So like a lot of popular comedians that I myself like, I will watch content that shits on these comedians, and it doesn't stop me from watching the content of the comedian that person is shitting on. But like it's almost like reverse hate watching where I go, I know Tom Segura is a great comedian, and this 15-minute video is just going to tell me all about why he isn't, and I want to see why he isn't and the points that this person's making. And I don't know if I'm getting angry because I'm realizing that this person has a point, or I'm hating that they're I hate that they hate the person I like. But there is definitely like I've noticed there's a definitive difference in how I feel emotionally when I'm watching that comedy underworld versus just another stand-up or another person's breakdown that is more in agreement with me.
Interesting.
Yeah. So in the debate, which also your publication Wealth Without Limits, which you draw on a ton in the debate, you argue that billionaires are typically in a better position to benefit the poor and solve collective actions than public officials.
Yeah.
What makes this so? Like, is it that our government is so shit that our best hope is to gamble on pop star spending? Like what makes Taylor Swift or billionaires like her having the money better than giving it to public officials and government?
A few things. So usually like the ordinary billionaire who's like not a huge philanthropist, they'll just be putting their money in like the market in some way. They'll just be investing in other businesses. And when you see that a business is profitable, that's because that business was providing a good or service to people that they thought it was worth it to pay for, so that they valued it. And there's like a positive sum exchange there. Meanwhile, the way that the government gets money is by forcing people to give it to the government. And there's like very little accountability for the government to actually deliver services to the people who need it the most, to deliver services that people genuinely value. So look at like the US healthcare system. So what is like the US government spending money on? Social Security, which is a basic income for old people, Medicare, Medicaid, so healthcare for old people and low income people, defense, interest.
Yeah.
So like if you were like to think like, oh, like how are we going to spend this like massive amount of money? Like, would you spend it on those things? Like, probably not. And so putting it into a business, which is like freely exchanging with people in a positive some way and like making our lives more productive and making everybody more prosperous, I don't think that's a bad thing, even if they're not doing anything philanthropic for the billionaires. I think that even that just investing is like already going to have some presumptive advantages or a lot of what government spending is doing. And then second, when we do see billionaire philanthropy, a lot of times it's for the global poor. And so there's no accountability for the US government for people who are non-citizens. But if you look at like the Gates Foundation, for example, they're doing massive public health interventions throughout Africa and South Asia, which is like really beneficial for the people who are the poorest people in the world. And so they don't have incentives, nationalistic incentives to divert resources to people who are already relatively rich. And so even low income people in America are at a global scale quite well off. And so when you do see billionaire philanthropy and it's addressing like global causes or collective action problems like climate change, those are like probably going to be doing more for the people who really, really need that assistance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that I've realized more and more as I'm traveling these past three 3.5 years, especially. I'm based in Panama right now. I was in Egypt, Colombia for a little bit, and there's a level of poor in those countries and the country that I'm in right now in many parts that you don't really see in the US, or at least in a lot of the places that I've been. Like there's a level of poverty where you look at a shack and you go like, there's no way a person lives in that. Like there's no way that's an abandoned property. And then someone will walk out and start hanging up their laundry. And I'm like, holy shit. Like,
Yeah.
this is crazy. And so, yeah, I feel like there's a lot of lack of comparison now where we compare the upper and lower levels in America, especially if you were born in the United States, but you don't really think about what that sort of bottom floor is going to be if you travel to somewhere else.
And like, yeah, I mean, totally. And in those countries, like they benefit from American innovation and prosperity and from like the American market as well, right? Like pharmaceutical innovation, for example, like once you have a drug invented, anybody in the whole world can use it. And then once it's off patent in the United States, it becomes like massively accessible. And so there's like ways in which like having economic growth worldwide is really good for people. Like what's going to get people out of poverty throughout the world? It's probably not going to be the Gates Foundation even. It's just going to be economic development. Like that's the main thing that's the most important thing for people in those countries. But then even if they're not experiencing rapid economic development yet, they still benefit from the innovation that comes from economic development in other places. I mean, people in America do have like serious problems with affording things, affordability. But part of that is a structural feature of being in a really highly productive society. So the more productive your economy gets, the more susceptible you are to this thing called cost disease, which is basically that the cost of labor, the cost of labor increases way faster than the cost of other things, because laborers, in order to compete for services, you have to compete against other industries like tech or manufacturing or whatever that are super productive. So even if the thing that like a doctor or a childcare worker or a teacher or somebody, even if those people aren't really doing much different than they were 100 years ago, the fact that in order to get those like high skilled, high potential productivity workers into your industry, you have to compete with more productive industries. And so the wages go up. So like that is a problem with like the American economy, that like education and healthcare is really expensive. I don't think taxing billionaires is going to address it. Like the reason that we have like these affordability problems in America is because America is so productive that it means that the price of labor is like really high. It also means though that purchasing power is really high for everybody. And that's why people can get like a bunch of cheap material goods really easily. So it's kind of like, but I don't think like setting a hard cap on like how rich somebody can be is going to solve that. That's just a kind of economic fact.
So when it comes to the ethics of billionaires, or the ethics of if there was a hard cap to be set, do you see billionaires in different buckets, like Taylor Swift, where she's gotten rich off of direct creative transactions, mostly like tours, tickets, streams? People want to listen to her and her net worth increases. And then you have inheritance, you have investments, you have just a whole ton of different ways where you can become wealthy and sustain wealth. Do you see those in different buckets ethically, or are they all one thing?
I think it's usually pretty hard for people to maintain ultra rich status across 3 generations. So when people are like, oh, this person is a generational wealth, of course that does matter for like where people start and where they go. But I think that's kind of overstated. I think most people who have extreme wealth, usually it's a combination of like, you know, they got really lucky, but then also they invested in something that was really innovative, or they invented something really innovative. And so they created like a new project. Often it is the product of some kind of creative innovation that was like beneficial for a lot of people. And then the other way that you can get it is through a kind of like crony capitalism, rent seeking type thing, like claiming a monopoly on natural resources, or I mean, in some ways the patent system is like this as well, but definitely like people who get billions of dollars because they can control like all of the oil in the country or something like that. But it would be weird if like the argument against having billionaires was focused on those people who are like the undeserving billionaires who are just there through like rent seeking and the crony capitalism and government favors. Because then you're saying that the government is so dysfunctional and unreliable that it enabled these, you know, oligarchic billionaire class people to like exploit a bunch of natural resources for personal gain. And therefore, we should empower the government. Like, it's just like, well, wait
Yeah.
a minute. It's like the same thing for those billionaires. So, like, I agree those billionaires aren't like a great look for the ultra rich, but like the reason that they're there is because of government failure. Like, that
Yeah.
that was what created those billionaires.
Do you think that's what's going on in the US right now, is that there's becoming less and less of a gap between the desires of politicians and the desires of the biggest corporations?
I mean, less of a gap? I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. Like, do you think that? Do you think that like politicians are more favorable to corporations than they? I don't know. What do you think?
I think that with the the ways that a politician can get rich and acquire a net worth beyond just the salaries that they're getting paid to be a politician, I think they have a little extra wiggle room than the average citizen, and I don't think that every politician will take advantage of that, but I do think there are outliers that get to the top and use that system
Hmm.
to buddy buddy with corporations that end up becoming very high up in the chain in the House or the Senate, and they
Yeah.
have massive influence. Even if they only have their own voting power, they have a lot of influence to gather other people to vote a certain way. And because of the way that they've buddied up with corporations that have, you know, maybe they've invested in them or they've gotten tips, and they
Yeah.
have seen that growth of their net worth, that it's really hard to say no to them.
Yeah. I do think there's a lot of kind of like entrenched public private partnership in certain industries, especially where it's like really hard to unravel like how much of this is the government, how much of this is the corporate sector. So, like the health insurance industry, for example, it's like so tied up in complying with government mandates and regulations. And so it's kind of like impossible to really make a lot of innovation in that sector right now. And it's like very favorable towards incumbents for that reason. So, that's like an industry where you would see that. Or like even in tech, where you see now big tech companies are like, oh, please regulate us, right? We want more regulation. Well, the reason is because, I mean, look what happens in pharma. If you want to get a drug through the FDA process, you need $1 billion. And so only a really big drug company can navigate that. And so having like a highly regulated industry is really protective of large incumbents and like kind of hostile to innovation, because then the
Hmm.
small biotech companies have to get bought up in order to get their drug to market. So I do see that, but I don't know if it's like so conspiratorial as all that. I think part of it is that voters like those regulations. Like voters want the government to regulate companies. And I think voters really underestimate the value of economic growth and innovation. Like they
Yeah.
don't see the way that like the policies that they support are hindering that. And I don't think that like people appreciate how much increases in their own quality of life are due to economic growth, and like
Mm.
how important it would be to preserve that. And then they see like rich people, like billionaires and stuff, and they're like, oh, we should regulate this. We should discourage these people from getting so rich. And they don't see all the ways they've benefited from that very same system.
Yeah, for sure. So so you have some great debate experiences, and you when I'm listening to you debate, when I've listened to you debate on the billionaire, the open to debate billionaire problem, uh, you seem very calm, and you seem very collected with your thoughts. And when I'm debating someone like my dad, I get the undying urge to say, "Shut the hell up! You're so stupid. I'm obviously right." And then we both go back and forth at each other. How does one maintain calmness and collectedness during an intense debate?
I think it's good if you're having a conversation where you disagree with somebody to first just to try to find the crux of the disagreement So if you can find, sometimes it's called like a double crux, where what is the thing that if they were right about it, then you would agree with them? And like,
Mm,
what's the thing that like, if you were right, then they should agree with you? Like, and if you can find that kind of like common ground crux, like really isolate, like what is the core of that disagreement? That's so helpful. And then if you're going into a debate looking for the crux, it kind of gives you like a spirit of curiosity of like, let me figure out like exactly why we disagree here. And that's like a good way to kind of take the temperature down if you're approaching it more as an explorer and less as a defender. Um,
mm, I like that.
and I think a lot of times people, their like own social identity is really tied to their beliefs. Um, so if you haven't changed your mind about anything really big in the past few years, that should be like a big red flag to you. That
Yeah.
like that you're forming your beliefs based on like your identity or vibes or the kind of person you want to be and not necessarily based on like what you think is true.
Yeah.
So what have you changed your mind about? I'm interested.
The past few years, definitely the ability to work remotely comfortably in places that I might not have been open to. A lot of that has to do with my girlfriend. We started dating about 3 years ago. She is a scientist and she's currently working for the Smithsonian lab down in Panama.
Oh, cool.
And we both were having a great time, but it was both a very fulfilling relationship. And if I wanted to continue, I was already working remotely in New York, and I'd have to take my remote act on the road and do it in somewhere like in Chitre, Panama, or Santa Marta, Colombia. Not like crazy place. Like I'm not working in the middle of the Amazon or anything like that, but
Yeah.
just places growing up in New York where these are just locations to visit to me, and not
Yeah.
necessarily places where I thought about living more deeply. So I've changed my mind on the ability to adapt, my own ability to adapt to living in certain areas, and what I actually need to live a fulfilling life. Like, do I really
Mm.
need to be able to have 9 coffee shops when I walk out of my apartment in Brooklyn, and
Yeah.
choose from all these, the kind of like what we were talking about before, with the overwhelming selection,
Yeah.
the anxiety of too many choices, where in this neighborhood that we're living in, it's a great suburb outside of Panama City. There's a couple coffee shops, there's a few good restaurants, there's a good grocery store, and I'm having a blast. And
Yeah.
I that opens me up to wanting to want to live in more places that I might not necessarily have lived before, or
I love
thought
that.
about living before.
So did you like surprise yourself by how like courageous and capable you could be? Like how like taking a chance and how like okay it was, like how it worked out all right?
Yeah, and if I'm being honest, I was going into it almost with like not the same hate watching sentiment, but a part of me that's thinking, I hope I have things to talk shit about, so I can, you know, like in here we can't get this, and you can't get a
Yeah.
bagel with lox, like all that. And after a couple weeks, like I started to stop caring about that, and I also
Yeah.
realized I'm super lucky to be able to work remotely and make a good salary and have these options, because a lot of people don't. But with my current situation, I definitely say I surprised myself a little bit.
Did you think it was kind of like intellectually freeing to get out of like your old in group? Like, do you feel like
Yeah.
you have more mental freedom there? Yeah, interesting.
Yes. I feel like I think differently when I'm in different places. I don't
Yeah.
think I would have had a lot of the same ideas if I was in Brooklyn, New York versus Chitre, Panama. I I think that just interacting and seeing the way that other people live makes me more, uh I don't know if intellectually vulnerable is the right word, but more willing to consider other points of view that I wouldn't
Yeah.
have considered should I not have lived in some of these places. So like I I guess an easy way to say that is my mind seems to be more open, for sure.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and if there's, I'm trying to think of anything else that I've changed my mind on really hard in the past few years or so. Um I would say and we don't have to get into an entire tangent on this, but the Israel Hamas conflict, I grew up in a 70-80% Jewish town in Plainview, Long Island. My dad's Jewish, and he's never been a pro-Israel guy. Like, he's Jewish. Like, we'll go to temple occasionally.
Yeah.
And then part of me arguing with my dad and debating with my dad, a lot of those debates have centered around Israel Hamas more recently.
Yeah.
And I was originally on board with, okay, Israel is justified to counterattack because they received a huge attack from Hamas, and then things started to devolve way further than that. And I started to talk to a few people on the podcast, to one, for curiosity, and two, to have some more ammo when I'm talking to my dad. And that actually, I enjoy it. We both enjoy it. We both get heated for sure. But that's something that I probably wouldn't have not necessarily changed my mind on, but I wouldn't have explored as deeply the Israel Hamas conflict within the past few years. If that didn't happen, and B, if I wasn't doing podcasts or sort of like actively meeting people in different parts of the world.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are good candidate answers. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say those, at least what I can think of now, those are the top two.
I always try to like convince students in the classroom, like, you can disagree about stuff with people and you can change your mind. You can say anything and it'll be all right. Like, you're not going to die. Like, it'll be okay for you to like, just like say it, change your mind, say that you're wrong, disagree with your in-group, disagree with your peers. Like, that's okay. Like, I try to really encourage people to just like kind of go out on a limb more and like just try out stuff that they think might be true that, I like.
Yeah.
So I like that you have the answer about finding out how much more courageous you could be, because it's like, I think that's true. Like, you don't know what you're capable of.
Yeah. And that also, it ties back into politics and political decision making, because something that's always a jab in politics is that you changed your mind. That's an insult somehow, is that you voted this way for 20 years and all of a sudden you changed up. Like, you're just doing it for the votes. And it's like, in some cases, sure, but what if that person genuinely changed their mind and so they no longer vote that way? Why is that a bad thing in politics? Why is that something that's always brought up as, you were against abortion in the 1980s, and then all of a sudden in 1994 you switched your view. You're just doing it for clout or your votes or whatever. So I wanted to get into one of my favorite parts of the debate was on the power of luck with Taylor Swift and just billionaire wealth accumulation in general. And I don't think about how lucky I am in life enough, whether it's physical or mental capacities, the family you're born into, the location that you're born into. How do you view the interplay of getting lucky and getting wealthy?
So I think it's a massive amount of it's luck. Like, for one thing, I think there's just a massive amount of luck associated with talent. Just being a talented person. So like, I like the NBA. So like, look at like what the determinants of success are in the NBA, and height is just huge. Just if you're lucky enough to be 7 feet tall, like Chet Holmgren, then like, wow, that's so lucky that he's so tall that he can be so good at basketball in that way. And so a lot of the luck is just baked in, before any social factors intervene, I think. And then also, people have the luck of being born in a productive society like America, where they're born, the family they're born into, having parents that support them. I grant all of that. Those are all huge drivers of inequality. The question is, how should we respond to the fact that there's a massive amount of inequality because of these unearned advantages? And I think that the fact that there's inequality per se isn't something that we should be objecting to or find objectionable, because I think a lot of times when people have that that kind of egalitarian impulse, they're always looking at the people who have more wealth and status than them, but they're not looking at the ways in which like their own ability is a matter of luck, or their own position is like really privileged as well. And people don't generally like look down, like they don't think of themselves as being the rich ones. But of
Yeah.
course, like living in America, we're all like massively advantaged relative to almost everybody for all of human history, and almost everybody in the world right now. It's just like massive amount of luck. And then nobody notices that or seems to care. And then they look at like a billionaire like Elon Musk and they're like, oh, look at that guy. Billionaire shouldn't exist. But it's like,
Yeah.
you're a billionaire in the course of human history. And so
Yeah.
instead of thinking about who has more, I think that we should focus on who has enough. But the question of who has enough is much harder to answer, because that involves thinking about what matters in life. What does it take to have a good life? And we have to answer a whole lot more questions. Like, it's very easy to look at a graph and say whether it's equal or not. It's a lot
Yeah.
harder to look at the floor and think whether that's enough.
Yeah. It's also funny to see the net worth of $1 billion and go, there has to be something particularly sinister about that. Like, if that person was worth 700 million, that they wouldn't be pretty much the same person as with $1 billion. Like when their Chase account or wherever they're keeping it. If they're keeping their money in a Chase account, they're probably not going to be a billionaire for long. But like that 1 second where it changes to $1 billion, all of a sudden like some switch turns on and it's like, well, now I'm walking around, planting chips in people or whatever, as opposed to just being exactly who you were before that.
Yeah, when people are like, oh, there's no such thing as an ethical billionaire. Like, whatever theory you have that's making you think that would also mean that like a lot of 100,000-aires are also like are not ethically acquiring their gains as well. There's nothing about the number. It matters what the genesis of it was.
Yeah. It's and I'm sure I do this in other areas as well, but taking the end game, taking the end amount, and then extrapolating forwards of this must be something that's not good. Seeing $1 billion and then going like, okay, for some reason this is not a good thing. Let me now dig and figure out what that thing is. I wonder if too that's just a selection bias where if you do have $1 billion, you have the capacity to do more things. And if you're doing more things, some of those things may be bad. So if you dig deeply into any billionaire's net worth, or their story or their decisions, there's probably going to be a few bad things, like a lot of people. But then that gets tied back to like, oh, this is because they're a billionaire.
I do think it's part of like, we have this impulse where we feel really vulnerable if somebody has a ton of power. Like, we're very worried about that because we find it threatening to have somebody that's amassed like a massive amount of power or status. But then it's weird to me that like people don't look at the government as also like this insanely high status, powerful thing. So it's sort of like, no one should be a billionaire. Well, no one should command an army. Like, it's like, there's a bunch of inequalities in power and status in our society. And I'm like way more comfortable with the inequality of power and status of people having more money than the inequality of power and status of people having more authority to use violence against people, which is government power.
Yeah, 100%. So speaking of digging through dirt on billionaires, I was combing through the Swiftly Neutral subreddit. Have you ever been on this subreddit?
No. Should I see this?
So Reddit is good in doses. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on there because it quickly devolves into a garbage wasteland of I feel like 90% of Reddit is people that joined a subreddit as a fan of something and then they slowly stop becoming a fan of that thing because of the subreddit. But just because of Taylor Swift and listening to the debate, I was going through the Swiftly Neutral subreddit, which by their own definition is supposed to be a place for non-fans and also Swifties to discuss controversial Taylor topics.
Good. Yeah.
And one of the main criticisms that keeps popping up in the subreddit is that people think Taylor is either blissfully unaware of the power of her fan base or purposely sicks them on certain enemies. And one example is there was an actor on a show. She told a joke about Taylor Swift that was written for her about something like that person runs through more men than Taylor
Yeah.
Swift.
I remember this,
Taylor tweeted about it, and then her fans attacked the actor on Instagram who said the line, didn't necessarily write the line, but she was the one who said it on the show. And then people were arguing back and forth of, does she know the power of her fan base? Is she purposely doing this? Is it a little bit of both? And I wanted to ask you, as a Swiftie, what are your thoughts on Taylor Swift and her level of awareness over the power of her own fan base? Basically, is Taylor secretly the satanic overlord of the Swifties?
That would make her sound so much cooler.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be so metal, right? Like,
yeah. 100%.
I don't think she's that metal, but maybe. I don't know. She does say that she's a mastermind here. I think there is something interesting about how people react to the Swiftie fan base. And I think some of it is probably well-deserved, but some of it's like, how to say this? So overwhelmingly, the Swiftie fan base is women. And people will be like, oh, it's like basic, or like there's this kind of like, that's so cringe. It's like so cheesy or whatever. It's like pumpkin spice latte season. I'm going to walk around Target, which like, by the way, I am that woman. Like that is like, I love pumpkin spice lattes.
Yeah.
Everything in my house is from Target. Like that stuff is great. It's so normie. Like they'd be like, oh, like it's so normal. And I feel like there's this kind of like misogynistic impulse in doing that, where people want to like degrade stuff that women like for some reason. They want to make it seem low status to be like prototypically feminine in this way. And I think that that's like part of how people react to the fan base. Although part of what they're picking up on about that kind of prototypical femininity is valid, because there are ways of interacting among women in terms of like managing these like really finely grained social dynamics that can be like really hurtful to people, even if it's not violent. Like it could be violent through like social exclusion, like not violent, but it could be like harmful to people through like socially excluding them or ostracizing them or insulting them or criticizing them. And it's not violating anybody's rights, but you know, it is like, it'd be really hard on people. And I think that that kind of like power en masse, it makes people uncomfortable. And like, I get it. Like maybe that should make people uncomfortable. And it's like a very like feminine form of like collective action that could be like, yeah, like it could be really harmful to some people. And I think that like some of like the reason that people push back against like the Swiftie fan base, it's like, yeah, maybe they just want to like degrade stuff that like women are about, but maybe there is also some kind of like new point that people make about like the way that women are aggressive towards each other, towards other women or whatever, that they're trying to articulate. And then it kind of comes off as like, I don't like Starbucks. But it's like, but they are, maybe people have like a kind of discomfort with that. And like, I also like feel that, like, I do think that like that could be like pretty unhealthy as like a dynamic in a community.
Yeah, no, that is a good point about the bullying. And I'm just thinking back to my time growing up in a guy's baseball locker room in high school and college, and the way that we bully and talk shit to each other is very direct. You talk shit to someone, you say something, they say something back. Maybe there's some pushing or shoving, but then we're generally friends after that. And in some ways, you might even be closer after you get in a brutal fight with a close friend who's a guy. And then, you know, we'd be hanging out with the lacrosse girls on campus, and then they're like, oh my God, like this bitch cropped me out of an Instagram photo. Like I'm never speaking to her again. And I'm just like, that is like, that type of bullying is so alien, because I'm just not used to the almost like long-term calculating or just like the, like you said, the social exclusion. There are definitely guys that do that, I'm sure, but it's just not a high percentage of what I experience. It's more like the direct, like head to head, like fuck you, and then it's like you just go at it.
Yeah, I do think that there are certain kinds of like layers to like the social dynamics, which you see within like the Swiftie fan base and how Taylor Swift fans on the internet interact with like Kardashians or the Barbs or, you know, like all of that, which is like, it requires like maintaining a lot of like knowledge of like the status games and the signaling and all of that. And if you kind of like step wrong or whatever, it feels very high stakes because like you could be shamed or excluded, and and people have different kinds of identities attached to like these subcultures within the fandom, and all of that can be used for bad in a way that's like super destructive and like not nice to people. But because it's not like physical aggression and it's not like violating people's bodily rights, you know, it doesn't have like the same kind of like vividness of like the fight in the locker room or whatever. But it could be like, and that's I think why like Taylor Swift was like, when she came out with Speak Now, Taylor's version, she was like, please do not murder John Mayer. Like she had to like say that. Like it was like, she had to kind of like call people back and say like, I don't endorse a lot of what this is.
Yeah.
Whereas like I listen to like a lot of like NBA podcasts, or I listen to Ryan Russillo, whose podcast I love. And like, I never see that in sports fandoms. Like that's like not a thing. Like, for example, I think like Joel Embiid was like not cool the way that he's been playing. And so I'm like, let me see like what people are saying about like Joel Embiid's flagrant fouls not getting called recently. And like people are like, Knicks fans versus Sixers fans, like there's definitely like some hostility there, but it's like not the same level as like the Kim Kardashian, Taylor Swift thing. Like it's not personal. Like nobody's making it personal about the people who are engaged in that debate. Like the Knicks and the Sixers fans.
When you say you don't see that in sports fandom, that is the making it personal, like the more personal text. Gotcha.
Like if you're a Sixers fan, you're this kind of a person, and like you need to like think about your choices for supporting Joel Embiid for the MVP.
You need to sit there and think about your own thoughts. You need to put yourself in timeout. Do
reconsider. Better. It should have been SGA or whatever. Like, that would never be like a thing that anybody would say.
Yeah, that's hilarious. So I heard you mention on the debate episode that you went to a Taylor Swift live show for the Eras tour in Kansas City. So I was in Denver for a wedding the same weekend Taylor was in Denver, and she shifted the city. Like I'd never experienced. I didn't know what was going on at first. Like the prices for the airlines, the lines in the airport, the hotels, the just like overall traffic. I've been to Denver many times in the past 7 or 8 years just for snowboard trips. And I was like, I've never seen this type of traffic, even in the height of winter where everyone's going to the mountain. This is insane. So I wanted to ask you, what is a Taylor Swift Eras show like? Can you describe what it's like to be there? Because I've heard people say that Taylor ruined other concerts for me.
It is so good. So we went Kansas City night 2, which was the night that Travis Kelce went also.
Okay.
Putting it out there. It was a magical show. I went with my 2 older daughters. So I have 4 kids. And so my freshman in high school and I have a 4th grader. And so I went with them. And then like a bunch of people from my family, some of them live in Kansas City. So that's why we went out to visit them. And then my best friend, Ryan, who's editing this edited volume with me. So we all went and we were like way up at like the nosebleeds. Like we were so high up.
Yeah.
And the whole city, like when her plane was landing in Kansas City, we were in Shake Shack, like downtown just shopping.
Yeah.
And the TV in Shake Shack was like interrupted the news and was like, Taylor Swift's plane is landing in Kansas City. And everybody in the Shake Shack was like, oh my God. And then, I mean, this is like a nice thing about like the kind of femme-coded fan base is like you're in the city, everybody's trading friendship bracelets, everybody's like part of this like big collective experience, is super supportive, and like, everybody's like so excited. We went to tailgating in the parking lot before tailgating. Yeah. And like you just walk around trading friendship bracelets, everybody's just talking about their favorite songs and albums. It's like this really nice kind of unifying cultural thing to talk about. I kind of feel like sports. Like I think it makes sense.
It does sound like a sport. Like if you replace Taylor with like a Broncos game or Chiefs game, I'd be like, this similar thing happens where people they tailgate before the game, get all different levels of shit face. They exchange, maybe it's not friendship bracelets at a football game, but you're exchanging, numbers, or you're exchanging beers, hot dog, like different types of shit. So
I kind of think that's sort of the innovation of it, is that it is sports for people who don't like sports. And because then you're like
Yeah.
in this stadium, is this like huge collective experience. It's 3.5 hours long. Everybody knows all the words. Like, it's like one of those, en masse cultural things. And she put on a great show, but she did Last Kiss for one of her songs, and she kind of screwed up the lyrics twice in a row. And like
Did
the
she
first
go
time
back and
everybody
do
was
it
like,
again, or did
yeah, so she
what
starts singing it, and then she's like, oh wait, like those aren't the lyrics. And of course everybody knows those weren't the lyrics, because like we all know all the words to all the songs. And so
Yeah.
and then she starts singing it again, and then she stops even though she had it right, and she's like, wait a minute, like that was right. And I just thought that the surprise songs, it was such like a nice innovation, because it's such a moment of like humanity and novelty, because most of the show is so like tightly scripted. And then she's
Yeah.
like, but I'm just going to show you for these 2 songs that I am like a real human. And then like in these surprise songs, like she really showed her that, because she was like, she had kind of like a little bit of a misstep. And it was just like,
Yeah.
I thought that was like very smart, the way that she put that in there to kind of make it seem like it's not all like a Broadway show or something.
Yeah.
It's really innovative. It's really good show. It's very well done. I think that I think she probably should get more credit for the like friendship bracelet stuff. And then also everybody has these other bracelets which like do this light show through the crowd. And so like the whole audience will light up in all these different colors that's like coordinated with the music. It's so cool.
So it feels it feels more like an experience than going to a concert.
I did feel like, I mean,
like.
I go to a lot of concerts because I also like a lot of other different kinds of music.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go to like punk shows and indie shows in town. Richmond has like such a great music scene, and it's like, I love going to concerts. It kind of felt more like a Broadway musical to me than a concert, just the way that like the production value was so high. And there is some like theater stuff. Like she'll act out these like little skits and has these sets. And so
oh wow,
it had more Broadway in it than you would think, I would say, with the production value. It wasn't just like, like a punk show where they like put up a banner in the back and then it's just like, that's it. We're just gonna play our instruments or whatever.
Yeah. Dude, 3.5 hours is crazy stamina to put on a concert for that long, and to do it. I don't know how many shows she did last year, but it seemed like she was in a different city every single night all over the world doing these length of shows. Like, I didn't know they were that long. I thought it was going to be, normal, like hour, 20 hour, 30-minute concert. 3.5 hours is insane.
That's kind of why it makes sense with like her and Travis. Cause I do think that like, I think she was probably correct that like she and Maddie Healy have a lot in common as artists. Like their songwriting is very similar, but like she and Travis Kelce have a lot in common as athletes. Like she's like running a marathon, like every couple, like she's probably doing a marathon worth of running every week. And it's just like, the physical toll that must take on you. But she seems so pro about it too. Like it's pretty, I mean, she has a song on the new album about how pro she is, but it's really just impressive as like a one man, like one person doing it. Like that's, it's kind of inspiring to like show you what people are capable of. I did have this feeling at the show, which I told my friend Ryan about, which I was like, I feel like I should try harder at stuff.
What was there any song or any piece of it in particular that made you feel like that, or was it more of an overall vibe that you felt after the show?
I think that a lot of people, probably myself included, they have this sense, or definitely myself included, they have this sense that they're capable of like leveling up, but then they just like are like lower agency or something. Like they get in their own way, or they procrastinate, or they overthink it, or they have anxiety. And like seeing that show, I'm like, this is what it looks like for somebody to just be like fully maxed out on agency. Like it's like they're just like she's just a super high agency person. Like she's not overthinking it. Like she's not getting in her own way. It just was like she just did it. Like she's just making herself do it. And it's like it's just like, is everybody capable of that? Like what, like is free will real? Like it just makes you think those types of questions. Yeah. And I think that she has a song kind of about this called I Can Do It With a Broken Heart on the new album. And she identifies in that way. And she's like, yeah, like no matter what is going on, I'm like gonna like I have willpower that will just be able to like power through anything. And it's like kind
Yeah.
of inspiring to like see somebody capable of that.
No, yeah, I got that feeling playing sports too, whether it was when we would travel to play SEC schools or I'd go to a Major League Baseball game and I see someone that puts on a show, they put on a performance that I was not capable of doing, that I didn't, whether it's at that time or uh, even if it's a totally different sort of what do you like create, even if it's creative versus athletic, like I was an athletic person seeing athletic feats performed in baseball, whether it's someone that's throwing a shutout and they're throwing 96 for 9 innings and I'm sitting there going like, holy shit, this is a level that I am not capable of. I can either say woe is me and say like fuck it, like what's the point if there are people out there like that, or I can use that as inspiration and say okay, maybe I'll never be able to get to that level, but that's at least an ideal. That's I could use that as a north star of I know this is possible. And it sounds super cheesy coming out of my mouth, but like the having the ideal of that performance and knowing that another human being is capable of that made me also want to try harder in my own athletic feats.
I mean, did you know anybody as an athlete where they weren't the most athletic person, but they just like were like their talent was self-control, agency, and just like wanting it? I feel like in basketball, I kind of suspect this about Chris Paul.
Okay. Yeah. I've known people like that.
Big. He, you know, he does not that. I mean, he's athletic, of course. He's in the NBA, but he's like 6'1" or something. And he's just had to find a way to just like, at every stage when you think he's going to be out, you're like, oh, like he's washed or whatever. And he just finds a way to like make himself useful and good every time, you know?
Yeah.
You know, people like that?
Yeah, one of the shortstops that I played with at University of Richmond, his name's Vinny Capra, and last year he got called up to the major leagues for the first time for the Toronto Blue Jays, and he was one of those guys at Richmond where he was very good. He was an everyday starter at shortstop, but you didn't look at him and think that's going to be the one to make it to the major leagues. There were other guys on our team where we would think, oh, he has that one tool. He hits the ball 500 feet. He throws it 97. Like there were other sort of more sparkly talents that other people had on the team that made it seem like they were going to be the ones to ascend into the major league heavens. And Vinny Capra got drafted. He kept just getting better year after year. I would follow his numbers. Like I followed a lot of guys on the team. And I'm like, at one point I'm like, holy shit, he's hitting 340 in AAA. He's starting as a middle infielder. And then all of a sudden he gets called up to the Blue Jays. And if you didn't know him, if you just saw him play in college and then you saw him on the Blue Jays, you might go, oh, I don't really get the connection. But then when you spend time with him as a person and you know how hard he works and how just like sometimes you just get guys that are just nitty gritty about the fundamentals. They'll stay up in the cages and just work on shit until they can't work on it anymore. He was one of those guys that just was like had a work ethic and liked talking about baseball, was all about baseball, and he continued to progress through the ranks. So he's one of those guys that I see as a not purely hard worker, because he of course has talent to make it to that level, but a guy who someone else that didn't work as hard as him but was blessed with the same level of talent definitely would not have made it to that level. And then
like his comparative advantage was agency, like
a lot of it, I would say. And then there's other people that were on the other end of the spectrum that I played with. I played summer baseball with some guys that were getting looks at for top 10 round draft picks, which is you know essentially a guarantee to at least get a shot in the major leagues. And I would be in the bullpen with them, and some of them would be drinking Four Locos or hung over from the night before, which we all went out and got fucked up on our own agencies. But I would at least, and a lot of my teammates would at least have a little self-control where it's like, all right, if we think we're going to pitch the next day, if we know we're playing the next day, let's not go out. Or if we do go out, let's not get to that level where we're hurting the next day. And there would be guys that show up 45 minutes late to stretch because they're hungover puking. And then all of a sudden they get into the game and it's like they're fucking dialed in. And I'm like, how the hell does this human being have the ability to do that? It would be so discouraging because I'm like, I work so much harder than that person, but they have so much more talent than me that they're going to make it further. They probably won't make it to the major leagues if they don't have a wake up call, but they'll at least like have a career as a pro baseball player off of talent alone. So it's funny now to look back at like those two sides of it. And when you see someone that talented, you just have to be like, yeah, like what am I going to do? They got blessed and they'll do with it what they will. And I can't, like suck their talent out of them. Like I can't take any of it. So there's no point in worrying about it.
But you could be Chris Paul. You could be that guy.
Could be Chris Paul, yeah. And then I see Chris Paul, guys like Vinny Capro, where I'm like, okay, I could see. I feel like there's not as much of a divide on talent level with some of the other guys I look at who make it to that level. So let me focus on that instead of the guy that's rolling out of bed throwing 97 hungover.
I do feel like Taylor Swift is more like a Vinny Capra, though. Like she's not the best singer, she's not the greatest dancer, but she's just like. She just found a path where like she can max out all of her comparative advantages. Whereas like someone like Rihanna is like so much talent and like so charismatic, and it's just like, but I do think that like it involved more strategy with the Taylor Swift type to just kind of think of like, how can I navigate every single advantage I have? Like, how can I like exactly calibrate my career in a way to like max out all of my comparative advantages through my choices? And it's like, that's like, I that's part of why I was like seeing her, especially. I was like, man, I gotta like work harder and also like focus better. And I think that she is one of those people where it's like she's really was fortunate enough early on to figure out like what her thing was. I tell that to my students, like you gotta find that thing that gives you the feeling that you had when you were a kid and you were just locked in.
Yeah.
And you were doing something that was kind of hard work, but like you were in that like flow state or
exactly.
Kind of, like it just felt so natural and good for you. And if you can find that in your life, like that's such a gift. And I feel like I found that in my life, but then I keep on getting like, there's this Substack that I read. He calls it gutter balling, where it's like when you're bowling and you're rolling a gutter ball and it's like, it looks like it's going really well for a long time. And then it like goes off to the side and like, the whole time you're like doing something that you shouldn't be doing, but everybody's like, yes, this is good. It's going to be so great. And then you're like, wait a minute. Like, how did I get distracted doing this thing? Like, you just got to like stay more focused. But I feel like it was lucky that Taylor Swift like found her strike early.
Yeah.
She found that thing.
Yeah. Being self-aware of the thing that gives you that flow state feeling or being self-aware of your own talents is a talent on its own,
right?
Because there are a lot of people that like, sure, I was about to say I like golf. I don't like golf. I like let's see, I like singing. Like I like music, but I there's nowhere in my brain where I think I'm gonna possess the natural talent to ever have a music career. In some way, maybe I'll do it for fun. Maybe I'll learn how to sing certain songs that I like, but I'm not going to get on that track where I'm going to start to put it in the bucket of possible professions.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's other things too. Like at the end of my baseball career, when I was going pretty downhill after a couple elbow surgeries, just was not the same, but I still had the dream there. And there was this ass kicking moment where I had this realization where I don't have the same arm. I don't have the same body that I did where I was at the height of my playing career, where I was getting some attention from professional scouts. I could continue to drive baseball into the ground and like maybe end up getting a free agent contract somewhere down the line, probably just bouncing around indie ball. But is that really what I want to do? And it was hard for me to do that because I loved baseball. I loved the act of playing and pitching, but it just wasn't realistic anymore for me to think that even at my best, like I was having outings where I knew I was throwing my best, but I still was just doing okay. And I was like,
Yeah.
if I'm doing okay at this level, it's not going to be better once I'm playing against guys who are better.
So for you, was baseball one of those things where you were just kind of like in that flow state, locked in zone?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was nothing else I would care about when I was on the mound. It
Yeah.
was I started, which you're throwing 5, 6, 7, sometimes a full game. I've come out of the bullpen where I'm throwing 1 inning, couple innings here and there. I've done pretty much all the roles you can do as a pitcher, and no matter which one I was doing, I always felt like, okay, once I'm on the mound, all that nervousness, all that anxiety, all the social pressures outside of baseball, what am I going to do with my life? Like, none of that matters. It's just playing this game right now, trying to
Yeah.
strike this motherfucker out,
Huh.
and everything else washes away. So if that's flow state, I definitely felt that. And that's also part of the reason why I watch podcasting, or why I love podcasting so much and also consume podcasts, is because I do feel like I get into a state where the conversation starts to flow, and then all of a sudden 40 minutes passes, just like we are on the baseball field, and you're like, holy fuck, it's the 7th inning.
Yeah.
It feels like the game just started. I have similar feelings to that.
That's great. Yeah. It's so great if you can find those things. I think
Yeah.
that I worry about, I mean, you were at Richmond, so you would know. I worry like the college process kind of like wrecks people's ability to find that for themselves, because a lot of what we tell people is like, okay, like you need to like satisfy this checklist to get in here, and it's so hard to get into this school and it's so expensive. And so I understand why people like don't try to find that for themselves while they're here. And then when you get here, it's like, okay, like here's a new checklist, and it's like all the classes you need to take, and then every class is just like, here's another checklist, and it's like accomplishments, and you're like, you get the status, you get the accomplishments and stuff, and then there's like what was it all for? Kind of.
Yeah.
And we're not like, I don't know that we help students kind of find the thing that's like where they can really be like locked in. I think it's more of us just being like here's another checklist, like check these boxes. And so I think that's like
Yeah.
a kind of warped thing about the college process for a lot of people.
Yeah, there doesn't feel like there's as much encouragement to explore, just to find the talent or the thing that
Yeah.
gives you that flow state. You're not going to get that from a class. You might be pointed in the right direction by a professor. You might have aspects of that in the classroom, but the infrastructure to do that, that's pretty much all on your own.
Yeah. I try to like encourage that as a professor. I try to like build a lot of air into my classes for like mental freedom and courage and exploration. But it's kind of across purposes with other things that you need to do in the classroom, which is like certifying people, giving grades, and so getting them to have developing the writing abilities. So it's just kind of a difficult thing. And then I worry sometimes people think that the accomplishment itself is the thing that they should aim for, like they kind of, it makes people confused about like what the purpose of their life is.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
No, for sure. I mean, I even felt that with baseball, which is I've wanted to make it to a certain level my entire life. So the accomplishment of making it to the major leagues started to supersede the joy and fulfillment that I was feeling from playing the game and the actual progress that I was
Yeah.
able to make. And then when that North Star explodes, it can be a really vulnerable and sad feeling. Very, very, like, you have a
Yeah.
lot of fear. I remember feeling so much fear and anxiety of like, what the fuck am I gonna do with my life? I've got to scramble, and am I gonna do accounting? Like, I have an accounting degree. I can try accounting, which I did. I can work for a startup. I can do what. And then I stumbled into podcasting by accident, and that was it felt like as much of a North Star as baseball did for
Yeah.
me as things started to progress. So I don't know how, well, like, I don't know how you would incorporate that journey into college? It seems like it would be difficult to have a sort of class that could teach you, or some sort of structure to like to enhance that journey, or maybe like accelerate the journey of finding yourself.
I do
Seems
try.
yeah. No,
So,
I believe you. Yeah.
I teach a class which is like this ethics class for seniors, and every week they have to like live out the lessons from philosophy in their
Mm,
lives, and like really internalize and like live in a way where they like really think about what this philosophy means for how they're deciding what to do with their lives, deciding about the meaning of their life. And a lot of the class is about the meaning of life and work. And so, but even then, it is still has like a very kind of professional life and work focus. But for a lot of people, the meaning of their life might be having a family. You know, there's a lot of ways you can have a meaningful life. But then college just like is like, you know, yeah, get this cool job or like have this specific
yeah.
professional accomplishment. And we really think of it in that way.
Yeah. I think travel also has a way of shaking your brain out of thinking patterns, like we were talking about before.
Yeah.
I wish someone had forced me to travel, whether it's a parent or a professor. Someone's like, you're getting on a plane and you're going to this place for 2 months. We don't
Mhm.
care what you do. Just like go be
Yeah.
a part of that place and then come back. I wish someone had forced me to travel earlier, like in my late teens, mid 20s,
Yeah.
early 20s.
Because you think it would
Yeah.
have like expanded your sense of possibility or something, or
I
maybe,
think I would have had more compassion earlier on in my life.
mm,
I'm always still working on that. I've can always become better at a person, but as a person. But when I started to travel more, and started to travel to uh, places that I wouldn't have necessarily traveled without my girlfriend getting a job there, that forced me to have compassion for different people's circumstances, and just like the way people live, and also just like my like New York centric view is like, this is the right way. Like people
yeah,
need to and like, not people who don't live like I do. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. Like they don't need
yeah,
changing. Like you don't have
right.
to. You could just live how you live, and I live how I live, and we can even do that across the street from each other in Panama, and like still hang out and grab a beer. It's all, there's no right
Right.
or wrong.
You're so free.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like one of the things I do in this class that has a lot of stuff about the meaning of life is I have them make a budget of how they would live off of a basic income, which would be, you know, like $1,300 a month, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, and so you can do it. Like you can totally do it. And part of the reason that I assign that to the seniors is whatever, like if you don't get a good job, you know, as you understand it, like whatever happens, you will probably be able to earn this much money. Like,
Yeah.
you will be able to support yourself with the skills that you have here. And like you have like a really good kind of safety net just with your own capacities that a lot of people don't have. And it'll be okay. And so you should like let that knowledge that you can like pay your rent and cell phone bill liberate you to just like take more risks and to not think that you just need to like do what everybody in your social circle thinks that you could do. You know, like
Yeah.
you should have confidence in yourself that you'll be able to meet your basic needs in some
Yeah.
way.
Is if someone's listening to this podcast that wants to do the sort of things that you challenge your students to do, whether it's living the ethics that you're learning in class, or you're making the budget for yourself with the basic income, where do you recommend that person start? Are there certain exercises, or places where you post publicly things you can
Oh yeah,
do if
all
you
of
just
my
want to do it in
teaching
your own
stuff.
own life?
Yeah, I mean they can look at the course, which is on my teaching website, which is just on my website. But
Nice.
there are things that we do in class that I think are like anybody can do that are fun. So um, one thing we do is I try to encourage people to like take a chance and say something that they think other people in the class are going to disagree with. So we'll play a game in class called Fighting Words, where like every student will write on an index card 3 things that they think other people in the room would disagree with. And it's like,
Mm,
you know, kind of their social circle, their peers. And then they meet with their partners and they pick each other's most disagreeable take. And then they go to a kind of semifinals round. And then every group of 4 will send one person to the front of class. And it has to be something you really believe that you think people are going to disagree with you about. And then those 4 or 5 people have to defend their disagreeable opinions to the whole class. And the person who has like the most people who disagree with her or him, that person will get like a certificate that'll say like, congratulations, you're the most disagreeable. Like, this is to certify that, your name here is the most disagreeable person in their ethics class. No one liked what you had to say. And the reason I do the certificate is so many of our students have just been socialized their whole lives to get academic certificates. So it like plugs into that piece of their brain, but they've also been very socialized to be like agreeable and like cool about stuff and to like not go out of a limb. And so I'm trying to like use like the certificate motivation to get them to like try disagreeing with people. And part of it is just what I said earlier of like, you got to like microdose courage. You got to like try to like do something a little bit uncomfortable just to prove to yourself that you're not going to die if a bunch of people say that they don't like what you said. And I'm like, I won't tell anybody who it was. Like, it ends here, but like in this classroom, say something you think that your peers are going to disagree with. And I think that's like a thing that people should try more often, is to just try not agreeing, or just try like saying a thing that you really think. If you really think it, just try saying it. It'll be okay. You're not going to die. You won't get fired.
For sure. In this exercise, do you have to believe what you are writing down, or can it just be something insightful that is going to piss people off, but you don't necessarily believe all of it?
No, I want you to believe it, because I want them to realize that like the part of it is, we read this in the context of like talking about political polarization. They read a paper like, what are the odds that your side is right about everything? And I want them to really believe it, because I want them to see that they can like be more vulnerable and show a part of themselves that they really think, and that they're not going to be totally shunned and ostracized. Like, it'll be okay. And like, it doesn't, they don't get shunned and ostracized. Even when they say things that are like, kind of like, not great, like it's still, people are like, oh, wow, who knew? But it's okay.
That makes me think of some comedy sets that I've seen where the comedian will just walk out and they'll start by saying something like, we should start punching more random people in the face. And then they'll just let it sit. And the audience is like, what? And then obviously the funny part is when they start to dig themselves out, and then they're getting the audience like, yeah, maybe we should start punching more random people in the face. This line of logic is flawless. So like, I think that there's also a comedic aspect of it too, where it's like just saying the thing, like that gut belief that goes unsaid, hashing that out and arguing it is also very fulfilling and fun.
Yeah. And I think like, it'll be okay. Like it's helpful for students to see that like the thing that they're like so afraid of is like social rejection. And what I tell them also is like, you're all seniors. You're not going to see these people in a year. Like, if not now, when? Like, you can say what you really think now of all times. And so,
so in the spirit of agreeing or disagreeing with things, I thought we could end off with a game called Love, Hate, or Indifferent.
All right.
And I tried to pick a few topics that have to do with either your work or just like the times, things going on right now. And I'm going to say something, and then you tell me whether you love, you hate it, or you're indifferent towards it.
All right.
And this is the first time I'm playing this game to end off. So now I'm thinking it's also good if I say whether I love it, I hate it, or I'm indifferent, because that's only fair.
All right.
So Midnights, the album by Taylor Swift. Love, hate, or indifferent? Love. Okay.
Love.
I'm indifferent.
Really?
I know a lot. I picked it because out of the albums by Taylor Swift on Reddit, it seems like most Swifties, or at least the bigger percentage that I could find as opposed to the other albums, hated Midnights as their number one. Like, I hate this on those lists.
I would say my least favorite of the albums is Lover.
Lover. Okay. It was Midnights and Lover. Those were the top two that I found. Okay. Kanye West.
Ooh, can I pick love and hate? Can we do both?
Yeah.
It's not indifferent, it's ambivalent. We gotta add like a fourth category.
Yes.
College Dropout, incredible album. Like, when I was younger, listening to College Dropout was like, oh my God, like, what is this sound?
Yeah.
So talented. And like, honestly, I even liked a lot of like the songs on Donda. Like, I thought like
Yeah.
there's a really interesting commentary on Christianity there and like what forgiveness really means and kind of like Christian hypocrisy. I thought there was like, and also like the Jay Electronica verses on Jail 2 was like extremely good. So
Yeah.
getting some
Yeah.
Jay Electronica in your life was good. I mean, I think Kanye is like a really complicated person, and probably, you know, has a lot of flaws. Obviously, has a lot of flaws, but I think you can learn from complicated people, and I think really flawed
Yeah.
people can make really interesting art. And so,
Yeah.
ambivalent.
I'll say I love his music. I love his creativity, his choices. I think he's still a North Star for a lot of music artists where he puts
Yeah.
out an album and then everything sounds like that 5 years later. Like he's ahead of the sound of the music industry. And then I'm tempted to say that I hate the things that he says, especially the anti-Semitic comments. But I also put a lot of responsibility on the podcasters who had him on during that period, the hosts,
Yeah.
where he looked like he was clearly struggling with some sort of mental illness. He even talked
Yeah.
about coming off of bipolar medication. And I don't know. I don't have an inside scope into Kanye West's life. I don't know if he believes a lot of the things he was saying or if it comes from mental illness or his willingness to just try to incite people and it was a complete misfire or maybe a combination of both. But I'll say I love his music and I'm deeply curious about the mental state that has led to his most recent blow ups in the media. I don't know if I hate him
Yeah.
specifically, but I don't like the situations that led up to that.
Yeah. And I also think like even on Donda, he does make good points about a sort of like tension within progressive political circles, which is like you can murder somebody and like people will be like, abolish the police, I'm a prison abolitionist. And it's like, great, like that's like a credible intellectual position. But then if that is your intellectual position, there is an argument, the same argument for that is an argument against being so excessively punitive towards people who have mental health struggles that lead them to be critical of progressives or to say really intolerant things. Like, same deal. And so when people were like, absolutely never going to listen to Kanye again, anything like that, that's a very punitive and sanctioning impulse, which is kind of
Yeah.
inconsistent with like the ethos that those very same people endorse elsewhere in their politics.
Yeah, it's also it's not just punitive impulse. You're also robbing yourself of fulfillment and just personal autonomy of being able to enjoy music that you previously loved to enjoy,
Yeah.
and then no longer allowing that to be part of your life. That's also a pretty harsh uh, punishment on yourself.
Right. And like, for what? I mean, this goes back to the Matty Healy thing where he was saying like, I don't think people actually care about what I think or say. I think people want to be able to stand together and point to a person that they think is bad and to make themselves look good because they're not like the bad person. But like that is a second level response that is like not linked up to thinking that, you know, it really matters that I condemn this person. Like that's not actually going to do anything in the world that's like that helpful. It's more about like signaling your
Yeah.
own like cultural purity or something. It's like
The next one is Hunter Biden. Love, hate, indifferent, or ambivalent.
probably indifferent. I don't really understand why people are so obsessed with that story.
I
I
will
don't get it.
say I'll
Yeah.
say I love Hunter Biden. I love the I've never seen anyone that close to the president, especially being his son, just audaciously post photos of hookers and cocaine on social media. And that taps into my love of comedy, where I'm like, the son of the president is he released a motivational video while driving and smoking crack. Like he was talking to the camera and you could see a crack
What?
pipe in the car. And I was like, this guy woke up and at some point made the decision, like, I'm not only going to smoke crack, but I'm going to like record a motivational blip for Instagram or whatever he put. And like something about me loves the just like the not give a fuck lawlessness.
Yeah.
I don't know where that comes from, but maybe it's just, like I said, comedic love of comedy, maybe love of watching it all burn down, where it's like if Hunter Biden, like, is this symbolic of society as a whole? I don't know, but I don't hate it and I'm not indifferent
Yeah.
to it. So
Do you like that it seems really free? Kind of?
yes,
Yeah.
I like that. I don't know if my thoughts on it went this deeply or if I'm just thinking of it now, but there's a lot of people who do cocaine and they don't get the same flack as someone who smokes crack because there's just like a different vibe. If someone,
For
walks
sure.
up, if someone walks up to you in the club and they offer you a bump, there's a lot of people that'd be like, oh, this is a normal thing to happen in a club setting. You're hanging out with friends. But if someone pulls out a crack pipe, you're like, like crawl back to the tunnel that you came from. And so part of me loves like the clashing of this perceivably lower class drug in the White House of like a dude smoking crack, like that dichotomy. I don't know. It's just fun. It's fun to me somehow. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. What's your next one?
Next one is Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift as a couple.
Probably love. Yeah. I have this thought, which is like, I think a lot of times, I mean, maybe this is like what you like about Hunter Biden, but like people want things to be like not too conventional. Like they kind of think like it's like kind of bad to be like overly normal. But
yeah,
I think that the kind of overly normal path, if you're just like a Bayesian and you're just thinking like what works as like a background base rate, like all purpose guide to life, you should probably look at like what's working for most people and just kind of like go with that. If like what you're trying, like if you're trying to like freestyle your own life and it's like not working for you, maybe you should think like, what is the normal thing? And like a lot of people like football. So like, why don't you try watching football? Oh, it turns out it's like super fun. And like a lot of people like Taylor Swift, like give it a shot. Oh, it turns out it's super fun. And like the fact that it's like those two things that are just like mass culture fun things and they're together. And it's like, everybody's talking like marriage or kids. It's like, yeah, marriage and kids, super fun. Like try it out. And I just love that like as a cultural institution, it has this sort of like normal, like median voter blandness that I think is actually like kind of instructive. So I kind of like their relationship as a sort of like kind of vindication of Bayesianism or something like that. It's like,
yeah, no, the more I think about it, the more I love it. And because I'm putting myself in the position of Travis Kelce, where I'm like, the dream was to become an NFL superstar, and now he's dating the number one pop star in the world. That is insane. Like that, like not only to achieve your dreams of being in the NFL, but a lot of the things that come along with it, like getting a shot at like Taylor Swift or Rihanna type figure, like whoever was that crush for you, and he's living that. That to me is like a holy shit. Like Travis Kelce, I hope I mean, both of them, I'm sure, do this where they wake up in the morning and they're like, I'm living the fairy tale. Like I'm living a version of the fairy tale. At least there's all the shit that comes along with it that people don't see, but like this is truly crazy.
And they like are eating chicken fingers and like playing pickleball, and like there's a kind of like, there's a kind of like, on one hand, it's so abnormal because they're like the top 0.0001% of like the entertainment industry in their respective fields.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it is sort of like, it doesn't have to be like complicated or hard to understand or anything like that. There's like a sort of like, it's like extremely legible, like their whole vibe, and like the talk about marriage, all of that. And I kind of like that. I think sometimes people are like a little bit afraid to just like the thing that everybody else likes. And like, I think Taylor liking Travis Kelce, it's like, yeah, like she just likes a thing that like everybody's like, and like him liking Taylor Swift, same thing. And it's like, I think there's a kind of lesson in that.
For sure. Well, Dr. Jessica Flanigan, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. This conversation was truly a blast. It flew by. I looked down at like 35 minutes and now it's almost at 2 hours, which hopefully, you know, that if anything means you're in the flow state, it's the passing of time without realizing it. So I'm grateful for this conversation and I really had a good time.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Where can people follow your work? Where can they keep up with you? I'm going to link the Open to Debate conversation as well to the podcast and the places where people can check you out.
I have a website, which is jessflanigan.com. And then I post on Twitter sometimes, just Jess Flanigan on Twitter.
All right.
But yeah, it was good talking to you. And if anybody listening wants to read more philosophy, they should email me. I love sending philosophy to people. It's like my personality flaws. I'll just bring up philosophy unprompted. Perfect. So if you're interested in philosophy, send me an email. I'll send it to you.
I will link all of that plus the email in the podcast description and on YouTube for people watching it there. And yeah, thank you again.
Thanks so much.